I have nowhere else to go. Please, just help us, Mary whispered, shivering in the snow and clutching her swollen belly. Adam froze, his breath caught, disbelief and fear warring in his eyes. Mary, you're pregnant. The world seemed to tilt as memories of abandonment, anger, and regret collided with the urgent reality before him. Flashes of her collapsing at his gates, frantic hospital monitors, and the first cry of their newborn pierced the silence. He had left her 3 years ago, never imagining she would return carrying his child. One Christmas, one secret, one chance to save what he almost lost, everything hung in the balance. Would he act before it's too late? Welcome back to Beyond Color Stories. I'm so glad you're here. Tell me, where are you listening from today? I'd love to know. Now, get ready, because the story we have for you will take you on an emotional journey. Make sure you watch it till the very end, because the ending will truly touch your soul. And before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heart-stirring stories. All right, let's dive in. Snow lay thick over the Blackwood estate, a pristine, silent blanket that muted the distant city lights and made the long driveway look endless. Each flake fell lazily from a slate-grey sky, landing on Adam Blackwood's shoulders as he stepped out of his sleek black car, the crunch of snow beneath polished leather shoes loud in the otherwise still night. The cold was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the irritation coiling inside him. The party inside was already behind schedule, the staff fumbling with last-minute decorations, and Adam's meticulous vision for this Christmas event felt under siege before it had even begun. He tugged his coat tighter around his broad shoulders, muscles tense as his gaze swept the driveway, expecting to see the familiar glow of the mansion and the orderly ranks of valet and staff he had trained to execute perfection without hesitation. But something dark and out of place caught his eye near the iron gates. At first, he thought it might be a stray branch fallen from the heavy snow-laden trees, but as he drew closer, the outline sharpened, revealing itself as human. Adam's irritation surged into alarm, a rare flicker of vulnerability cutting through his carefully honed control. The figure was crouched against the snow, shivering violently, the thin coat doing nothing to ward off the merciless winter. Frost clung to her hair, damp strands plastered to her pale cheeks, and her hands hugged something close to her body, something that made his blood freeze in recognition even before the full picture registered. He stopped short, heart hammering in his chest, a sensation that had not come so violently in years. She was unmistakable. Mary, the woman who had been his wife in name for 3 long years, yet whom he had abandoned emotionally with cold calculation. His ex-wife by law now, for 7 months, yet here she was, vulnerable and raw, standing or rather collapsing in the merciless snow outside the gates he had once crossed with pride and control. His mind whirled, every memory he had pushed away for convenience and business smacking him in the face with cruel insistence. The sight of her hollowed cheeks, the blue tint on her lips, the way the snow clung to her soaked coat, it all hit him like a physical blow, stealing the very air from his lungs. Adam's steps slowed, his usual command of presence faltering as he assessed her state. Her knees wobbled, a silent plea for help that he had no right to ignore, yet every fiber of his being screamed with disbelief and regret. He wanted to call out, to demand answers, but the words stuck in his throat as he noticed the way she shielded her stomach with one hand, the other pressed against the freezing snow. The subtle swell beneath her coat was unmistakable. Adam's eyes widened, the realization slicing through his carefully maintained arrogance. She was pregnant. 7 months along, carrying a life he had no part in raising, at least until this very moment. Her gaze lifted weakly, meeting his with a steadiness that contrasted sharply with the tremors racking her body. She did not cry out, did not plead, did not even flinch as he stepped closer, each footfall seeming impossibly loud on the snow-covered driveway. Her pride remained intact despite the merciless cold, a stubborn, quiet defiance that made the pang in his chest tighten. He wanted to scoop her into his arms, to shield her, to fix this impossibility, but before he could even reach her, her knees buckled, the thin fabric of her coat offering no defense against gravity or exhaustion. She collapsed fully onto the snow, a shuddering heap, and Adam's world narrowed to a single, urgent point. Her survival. He ran, boots cutting through the icy ground, each stride an effort against the snow that threatened to pull him down. Panic clawed at him, foreign and unwelcome, because for once it was not control or money or status at stake. It was her life, and the tiny life she carried within her. Snowflakes melted on his cheeks as he knelt beside her, cold biting through his coat, but he barely noticed. His hands hovered uncertainly over her shoulders, as though mere touch could restore warmth and life to someone he had failed so completely. Mary's eyes fluttered weakly, lids heavy with exhaustion, and Adam felt an almost unbearable surge of guilt. He remembered the years he had spent choosing boardrooms over dinners, contracts over connection, silence over apology. The realization that she had suffered alone, outside his reach, struck harder than any business failure ever had. The air smelled sharply of winter and pine, but beneath it was the unmistakable scent of desperation, of survival, of a woman forced to endure what should have been his responsibility. Adam's hands moved instinctively, one bracing her back, the other under her knees, trying to keep her from the freezing ground, trying to give her the tiniest shred of comfort. Her breathing was shallow, ragged, each exhale visible in the cold air, and he cursed himself silently for the years he had allowed distance and ambition to justify abandonment. He searched her face for any sign of recognition, and when their eyes met, he saw no anger, not yet, only shock and weariness, a fragile defiance that mirrored the snow's own persistence. Mary tried to speak, her lips barely moving, but no sound emerged, and Adam realized she was at the very edge, teetering between consciousness and surrender. His chest tightened, an unfamiliar vulnerability breaking through the fortress of his pride, and for the first time in years, Adam felt powerless. He wrapped an arm carefully around her, lifting her slightly, conscious of the weight of her condition, conscious of the life she carried within. Every movement was deliberate, cautious, aware that one wrong step could have irreversible consequences. The snow beneath them seemed to mock his frantic precision, each flake a reminder of the time he had lost, the nights he had ignored, the distance he had cultivated for power rather than presence. Mary's hand rested lightly on his arm, almost instinctively, and Adam's pulse spiked. She was reaching out, in her own silent, fragile way, for something he had abandoned long ago. A sudden gust of wind swept through the gates, biting cold against his face, forcing him to shield her with his body. Her lips were blue, her fingers numb, but she didn't cry out. Adam's mind raced. He could not leave her here. Not now. Not ever. Snow fell on her hair, clung to her lashes, and Adam realized with sick clarity that if he hadn't noticed her in time, if he had hesitated, the outcome could have been devastating. His hands tightened around her, urgency driving every movement, and he forced himself to breathe, to plan the next step, to maintain a semblance of control even as his heart raced uncontrollably. Somewhere behind the mansion, lights flickered in anticipation of his arrival. The Christmas event waiting, oblivious to the life and death struggle unfolding just beyond the gates. Adam barely registered the sound, his entire being focused on Mary, on the fragile swell of her stomach, on the cold, indifferent snow that seemed determined to claim her. He pulled her closer, pressed a coat around her shoulders, tried to warm her trembling form, but nothing felt sufficient. Panic and guilt and disbelief collided inside him, a storm far more violent than any winter outside. Then, as her eyelids drooped and her body slumped further, a final shudder running through her frame, Adam felt an overwhelming surge of desperation. The world had narrowed to the sound of her breathing, the faint movement of her chest, the faint pulse of life he was desperate to protect. His hands trembled slightly, a rare crack in his iron composure, as he whispered her name over and over, each repetition a plea, a demand, a vow to himself that he would not fail her again. Mary's eyes fluttered one last time before closing completely, her body succumbing to the cold and exhaustion. Adam's voice caught in his throat as he called for help, the sound harsh and urgent, echoing against the snow-laden gates. Panic surged in his chest, but there was no room for hesitation. Every second mattered, every movement critical. He scanned the driveway frantically, searching for any sign of staff, any warmth, any lifeline, but all he saw was endless snow and the fragile figure in his arms. Her small frame, seemingly weightless in his grasp, carried the full weight of years lost, of guilt accumulated, of a life he had abandoned through cold choice. As he lifted her fully, cradling her against his chest, Adam felt the first real pangs of fear he had ever experienced in his life. Not fear for himself, not fear for wealth or status, but fear for the woman who had been at the center of everything he had ignored. His hands moved instinctively, brushing snow from her hair, steadying her trembling limbs, desperate to offer what warmth and safety he could in the face of unrelenting winter. Her lips parted slightly, and he caught a faint, almost imperceptible whimper, a sound that ignited an urgent fire in his chest. He would not fail her. Not again. Adam's gaze swept the estate, the glittering mansion that had once symbolized his mastery over life and business, now meaningless in the face of immediate danger. Snow fell thicker, heavier, but he barely noticed. His focus was absolute. He ran, steady but frantic, toward the house, toward warmth, toward salvation. Every step was a negotiation with gravity, with the slippery snow, with the growing weight of the life he now carried in his arms. Mary's head rested lightly against his chest, her hair damp, her body fragile, and Adam vowed silently, fervently, that he would never again allow ambition or pride to take precedence over her, over the life she carried, over the years he had lost. He reached the first threshold of the mansion driveway, breath ragged, arms aching. And then, just as he saw the door approach, Mary's fingers twitched slightly, a faint pulse of life that sent a jolt of relief through him. Her eyes fluttered open, just enough to catch his, a silent acknowledgement of presence, of survival, of connection. Adam's chest ached with a cocktail of guilt, love, and desperation. The snow continued to fall, indifferent, relentless. But here, in this narrow circle of urgency and care, he felt the first flicker of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: responsibility, accountability, and an undeniable surge of protective instinct. His heart hammering in a way that reminded him painfully of every choice he had avoided, every absence he had cultivated, every word he had left unsaid. With the mansion looming behind him, warmth and light waiting, he ran faster, knowing that the seconds could decide everything, and that what happened next would change both of their lives forever. The harsh, fluorescent lights of the emergency room stabbed at Mary's closed eyelids, forcing her into reluctant consciousness. Every limb ached, a painfully vivid reminder of the frozen agony she had endured outside the gates. Her fingers twitched reflexively, feeling the familiar numbness of hypothermia receding slowly but painfully into a dull, throbbing ache. The smell of antiseptic and the faint metallic tang of blood filled the air, mingling with the muffled sounds of monitors and beeping machines. An IV drip entered her arm, steady and rhythmic, pulling nutrients and warmth back into a body that had been pushed to its limit, each drop a fragile lifeline, threading through veins exhausted by shock, stress, and cold. She tried to shift, to sit upright, but the effort was laughably futile. Her muscles screamed in protest, limbs heavy, as though weighed by lead. Panic threatened, but she forced herself to breathe, slow and shallow, tasting the sterile air as it filled her lungs and forced her heart to remember its regular rhythm. The pain of cold was giving way to the unfamiliar sting of warmth, the kind that burned because it had been absent for too long, because her body had been left to fend for itself when it should have been protected. Mary's gaze drifted around the room hazily, focusing first on the monitors, then on the tall figure standing several steps away, hands clenched behind his back. Adam Blackwood's presence was a silent storm. He did not move, did not speak. yet his eyes betrayed a maelstrom of emotions, guilt, disbelief, urgency, and that cold steel of control that had once defined him. His hands were rigid behind him, fists curled so tightly that knuckles had gone pale. Mary's lips parted slightly as she attempted speech, her throat dry and raw, and the first words she forced out were heavy with quiet authority. She wanted to leave. Her body ached, but more than that, her pride demanded distance. She had not come for him, had not sought his help. She had survived without him for too long. Adam's jaw tightened imperceptibly, a shadow of the old arrogance surfacing for a split second before it was replaced by tension. He stepped forward, voice low but sharp, demanding an explanation for her presence. Mary's response came slowly, deliberately, without the faintest trace of panic or dramatization. Every shelter was full. Every door had been closed in her face. She had nowhere left to turn. Not one of the carefully curated networks she had tried to rely on could offer refuge. Not one friendly face had appeared to lift her from the storm. She had come here, to him, because it was the only place she had left, and she would leave again when the immediate threat of exposure and death had passed. She refused the money Adam offered automatically, refusing the luxury he could wield with ease. She refused the concern that came as naturally to him as breathing, refusing the false security of a man who had abandoned her when it mattered most. Each refusal was measured, unwavering, a declaration of independence even in her most vulnerable moment. Adam's eyes flickered at her words, an internal battle playing out in his expression. He wanted to argue, to insist, to take control as he always did. Yet something in the weight of her exhaustion, the steady line of her voice, restrained him. The room went quiet, tension thick enough to choke on, until the doctor, a professional in every sense, spoke with deliberate gravity, forcing Adam to acknowledge a truth he had been skirting since the gates. "She's 7 months pregnant," the doctor said, eyes steady, tone clipped and businesslike, "and the stress she endured outside could have triggered early labor. If we had been even minutes later, the consequences could have been catastrophic." The words hit Adam like ice water. 7 months. The months during which he had finalized the divorce, months he had spent in boardrooms and luxury hotels, months he had convinced himself he was free. And all the while, Mary had carried their child, alone, in the freezing wind, abandoned by the man who had fathered this life. His fists unclenched slowly, tension radiating out of his shoulders, yet the guilt remained raw, unyielding, igniting a storm inside him that no amount of wealth or status could pacify. Mary's breathing trembled faintly, a ghost of exertion and exhaustion. Her gaze met his, steady despite her frailty. And in that look, Adam saw years of isolation, years of silence, and the quiet insistence of survival. He realized with piercing clarity that she had not come seeking his protection, not because she needed him now, but because circumstances had left her with no other recourse. Every instinct he had to control, to dominate, to rescue, wrestled with a new understanding. She did not need saving. She had survived. She had endured. The nurse adjusted the IV, her hands practiced and calm, but the tension in the room refused to dissipate. Adam stepped closer, every movement deliberate, careful not to violate the fragile boundary Mary had established. Her body was frail, yet the resilience in her posture, the refusal to lean fully on him, struck him harder than any physical blow ever could. He wanted to reach out, to pull her into warmth, to shield her from every danger that had stalked her, yet the part of her that had carried on without him resisted that urge with subtle strength. Minutes stretched painfully, each one laden with unspoken truths, until the doctor continued, voice clipped with professionalism but shadowed by concern. "We need to monitor her closely. Any further stress could be catastrophic. She must rest. No sudden movements, no arguments, no surprises." The room seemed to constrict around Adam's chest at the word surprises. He understood immediately that nothing in his life could prepare him for what he now faced: accountability, presence, and the raw, exposed truth of a woman and child who had been abandoned by the very person meant to protect them. Mary attempted to shift again, trying to sit upright, but the effort drew a quiet groan from her lips, a sound that punctuated the tension in the room. Adam moved instinctively, careful, deliberate, an unfamiliar tenderness threading through his usually cold control. He guided her gently back, securing her position without force, watching the subtle flinch of her body at any contact, noting how she instinctively shielded her stomach as if instinct alone demanded protection for what he had neglected for months. The IV line continued to drip steadily, the tiny clicks marking seconds in a way that felt agonizingly slow. Adam's eyes never left her, following every twitch of her fingers, every labored breath, every faint flicker of consciousness in her gaze. A cold shiver ran down her spine, involuntary, despite the warmth of the room, and Adam's hand hovered near her arm, unsure whether to offer support or respect her boundaries. The tension between them crackled, unspoken and raw, a delicate balance of authority, guilt, and respect for the life she carried. A faint beeping from the monitor drew Adam's attention momentarily, a reminder that life was fragile, fleeting, and entirely out of his control. He clenched his jaw, a rare hesitation crossing his features, aware that his every instinct to dominate the situation had to be tempered with caution, with care, with the recognition that he was no longer the architect of all outcomes. The life in front of him demanded patience, presence, and humility, concepts he had long abandoned in pursuit of power and perfection. Mary's eyes flickered toward him, and in that glance, Adam saw not anger, not accusation, but weary endurance. She had survived storms he had never witnessed, battles he had ignored, and nights that would have broken lesser souls. The room seemed to constrict around the three of them, the mother, the father, and the silent presence of a life waiting in her womb. Adam understood finally that every decision he had avoided, every absence he had cultivated, had brought him to this point, facing the undeniable consequences of neglect, of pride, of abandonment. The doctor stepped closer, clipboard in hand, voice softer now, almost a whisper above the beeping. "We need to discuss her condition in detail, but she must not be moved abruptly. Any emotional shock could trigger contractions. Understand?" Adam nodded stiffly, the weight of responsibility settling into his chest, heavier than any boardroom deal, heavier than any empire he had built. He realized that control was no longer about power, it was about presence, about awareness, about caring in ways that money could never buy. Mary's gaze drifted briefly to the window, where snow continued to fall relentlessly, indifferent, as if mocking the chaos that had brought them here. Adam followed her line of sight, then looked back down at her, heart hammering. The fragility of her body, the unwavering resilience in her eyes, and the child she carried formed an impossible knot in his chest, a mix of fear, love, and regret that refused to unravel. He took a cautious breath, aware that every second, every movement, could tip the balance between safety and disaster. A sudden twitch in her fingers made him flinch inwardly, a stark reminder that her strength was finite, that she had endured far beyond human expectations. Adam leaned slightly forward, offering an arm, not to dominate, but to support, to steady, to silently promise that he would not abandon her again. Mary's eyelids fluttered, acknowledging his presence with the faintest of nods, a silent communication that no words could capture. She had survived, yes, but she had also measured his presence, gauged his intentions, and was not yet willing to surrender fully to him. The doctor's voice cut through the tension again, this time firmer, sharper, almost a command. She could go into labor at any moment. "We need to prepare. This is no longer theoretical." Adam's heart surged with panic, urgency, and a terrifying sense of helplessness. Every second counted now, every choice, every movement critical, and the realization hit him like a hammer. The life he had ignored for months could be snatched away in an instant, and nothing, not money, not influence, not power, could prevent it. Adam remained frozen, staring at the subtle swell of Mary's stomach, every muscle in his body rigid with disbelief and an unfamiliar, painful guilt. His mind raced, scrambling desperately to reject what he already knew, to invent excuses that would allow him to claim ignorance, to argue that circumstance, timing, or fate had kept him from noticing. But the evidence was undeniable. There was no hiding, no escaping, no rationalizing away what had been there for months, growing, surviving, carrying life, while he had been absent. His chest tightened, a constriction that made every breath a conscious effort, as he felt the weight of his past choices settle like stones across his shoulders. Mary's gaze met his, steady, unwavering, a mirror reflecting the years he had refused to acknowledge. In her eyes, he saw endurance, quiet defiance, and a painful clarity that left no room for deception. She reminded him of what he had consciously chosen to forget. The warmth of her presence, the softness of her laughter, the way she had once looked at him with love so deep it had seemed infinite. And yet, he had turned away. He had walked out, deliberately, emotionally absent for 3 years, leaving a marriage intact only on paper, while his heart and attention were consumed by boardrooms, hotels, and the unending pursuit of power. 7 months ago, he finalized the divorce. He remembered the date with cold precision, the legal signatures, the finality of ink on paper, and yet, in that moment, he could not reconcile with the fact that Mary had already been pregnant. She had carried his child, alone, without so much as a word reaching him. He remembered the orders he had issued himself, the instructions that had sealed her fate without intention but with effect. No personal interruptions, filter everything, protect the empire from distractions. His assistants, loyal and precise, had obeyed, ensuring that every attempt Mary had made to reach him was intercepted, ignored, or lost in bureaucratic obedience. Adam's eyes flickered with fleeting pain as he remembered the subtle messages she had sent, attempts to pierce the fortress he had built around himself. Emails carefully crafted, letters that had never arrived, phone calls that had been screened, gestures that had been quietly blocked. And then he remembered her voice, or rather, the memory of its quiet resolve when she had admitted to giving up. She had stopped trying, exhausted from pleading with a man who had already left her behind. There had been only one crack in her armor, a single moment where emotion had betrayed restraint, a single quaver in her tone revealing the despair that had become her silent companion. She had survived, yes, but not without cost. The years of absence had left marks deeper than the winter cold outside the gates, scars of isolation, fear, and the harsh lessons of self-reliance. Every detail of her suffering now unfolded vividly in Adam's mind. Nights alone, the cold that no fire could fully chase away, the gnawing uncertainty about what he would have done if she had called, the constant vigilance to protect the life growing inside her despite the absence of the man who had fathered it. He had been absent, not by fate, not by circumstance, but by choice. And now the stark reality of that decision confronted him in ways no financial success or social power could mitigate. Mary's voice, when it finally broke through his spiraling thoughts, was quiet yet resolute, carrying no accusation, no bitterness, despite the weight she bore. She spoke with a clarity born of survival, a measured honesty that both cut and healed in its stark simplicity. She told him what he needed to hear, but not with the faintest trace of theatricality. There was no dramatization in her words, only the truth of her experience, the recounting of what she had endured alone. She did not seek vengeance, nor did she plead for sympathy. Her statement was a fact, delivered plainly, without flourish, but with undeniable impact. Adam's mind struggled to process her calmness in contrast with the chaos of his own thoughts. He wanted to ask countless questions. Why had she never reached him directly? Why had she not sought another way? Why had she endured this alone when he, a man capable of controlling empires, could have ensured her safety with a single phone call, a single gesture, But before he could articulate a word, she continued, filling the room with the weight of what he had missed. Her exhaustion was palpable, her voice low, almost brittle, yet unwavering. She explained the practicalities of survival. Shelters full, doors closed, every avenue of assistance barred by circumstance, prejudice, or sheer misfortune. And through it all, she had protected herself and the child with quiet determination. Every word landed like a blow, each one forcing Adam to confront his failures. Guilt clawed at him, relentless, gnawing at the edges of his pride, leaving him vulnerable in a way he had long avoided. He realized, with crushing clarity, that Mary had not merely survived. She had thrived in the most basic, essential sense. She had protected life, endured hardship, and maintained dignity, all in the absence of the man who should have been present, who should have carried responsibility, who should have been there. Adam swallowed hard, the taste of regret bitter on his tongue. He remembered how easily he had walked away, rationalizing absence as necessity, control as success, silence as a virtue. Every justification now felt hollow, meaningless. His empire, his wealth, his meticulously curated life, all of it seemed insignificant in comparison to the simple fact that he had abandoned a woman carrying his child. The room seemed to close around him, every monitor beep, every distant footstep magnifying the enormity of what he had missed. Mary's hand, resting lightly on her stomach, shifted almost imperceptibly, a tiny, instinctive protective gesture. Adam's chest constricted at the sight, the enormity of his absence settling like lead. Every step he had avoided, every phone call unanswered, every letter unacknowledged, now converged into a singular truth. He had fled responsibility, and now he faced the consequences in their most undeniable form. His heart raced, a mixture of fear, shame, and a dawning recognition that nothing could undo the months lost, the pain endured, the isolation imposed. A nurse adjusted the IV, snapping Adam momentarily from the storm of his thoughts. He glanced around the room, at the clinical whiteness of the walls, the sterile efficiency of the equipment, and realized that no luxury, no wealth, no influence could have protected Mary in the moments that truly mattered. Her resilience had been the deciding factor, not him. Not until now, when he stood facing her, did he understand the full measure of his failure. Mary's eyes, meeting his without hesitation, conveyed more than words ever could. They carried history, endurance, and the subtle, unyielding assertion that she had survived everything he had abandoned her to endure. She did not ask for forgiveness. She did not demand recompense. She merely stated the truth of the present moment, a reality he could no longer avoid. Adam felt an almost physical weight pressing on him, the sum total of his neglect, his absence, and his failure to protect the life entrusted to him. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to beg for understanding, but his voice faltered, caught somewhere between shame and disbelief. He realized the enormity of the moment. Mary had waited, suffered, endured, and had carried forward without him. And now, she was standing, or rather lying, before him, strong despite fragility, resolute despite abandonment, and his absence of 3 years and emotional void of 7 months now confronted him in ways no boardroom victory could mitigate. Mary inhaled sharply, the first audible intake of breath that broke the tension, and Adam's gaze followed the subtle rise of her chest. Each detail was magnified, every micro-movement a testament to her strength, her resilience, and the child growing within. He saw the faint flutter of her fingers, the gentle pressing of her hand over her stomach, the shallow but steady rhythm of her breathing, and the reality hit him with unrelenting force. She had endured what he could not have endured. Alone, without complaint, without reliance. She leaned slightly toward him, voice low but clear, cutting through the haze of his guilt. "The baby," she paused, ensuring the weight of the words settled between them, "is yours." The words hung in the room like an invisible wall, solid, immovable, undeniable. Adam's entire body froze, his heart stammering in a panic he had not known since youth. Time seemed to stretch, every second dripping with a tension so thick he could almost taste it. The realization that he had been running from a truth for months, that he had been absent from the life most consequential to him, now confronted him fully. With no escape, no denial, no mitigation, how would he respond? Would he collapse under the weight of shame or rise to protect what he had ignored? Would the months lost, the distance created, the silence imposed, now define his future? The answers were uncertain, teetering between despair and the faint glimmer of accountability. Adam's eyes, wide and unblinking, remained locked on Mary's, tracing the arc of her endurance, measuring the cost of absence, and understanding finally that his life, as meticulously controlled as it had been, had failed in its most basic, essential purpose. The moment the words left Mary's lips, echoing in the sterile hospital room, Adam felt a constriction in his chest, unlike anything he had experienced before. "The baby is yours." They lingered, heavy and undeniable, imprinting themselves on his consciousness, a weight of consequence he had spent months running from. His first impulse, beyond disbelief, beyond shock, was fear, not for himself, not for his empire, but for the implications of that truth. The enormity of responsibility, dormant and unacknowledged for months, now surged like a tidal wave, threatening to sweep away the carefully constructed life he had clung to. Fear, raw and sharp, eclipsed everything else, and for the first time, Adam considered the impossibility of escaping what he had caused. He drew a deep breath, hands trembling just enough to betray his composed exterior, and made the decision that had lingered unspoken between them since the moment he had understood the full scope of her truth. A DNA test. Not out of doubt, not because he disbelieved her, but because he feared facing what certainty might demand of him. Fear of accountability, fear of consequence, fear of seeing reflected in black and white the life he had abandoned. His request was precise, careful, deliberate, masking the emotional chaos roiling beneath his meticulously maintained exterior. Mary's eyes, steady and unwavering, met his. There was no hesitation, no shock, no entreaty to delay him or forgive him. She agreed immediately, a quiet acknowledgement of the reality between them. "Do it," she said, voice firm yet soft. A calmness born of endurance. She added, almost in passing, a warning that struck deeper than any argument ever could. Proof would change nothing about the years of absence, nothing about the emotional abandonment, nothing about the nights she had endured alone, and nothing about the cost of survival without him. The words settled between them, unflinching, demanding acknowledgement that his presence, or lack thereof, had left permanent scars. Doctors moved efficiently, explaining the timeline with the kind of clinical precision Adam found almost unbearable. Emergency prenatal testing could provide the answers he sought, they explained, but results would take days, not hours. Their tone was factual, devoid of drama, but the gravity of their statements settled like a stone in Adam's gut. Every detail of the procedure, every precaution, every calculated step highlighted the fragility of the life Mary carried, and the urgency of decisions made in silence weighed heavily on him. The staff moved around them, efficient and alert, yet Adam felt frozen in a private storm, suspended between guilt and the creeping realization of his absence. Mary was admitted for monitoring, the sterile routine of hospital life forming a quiet background to the emotional turbulence in Adam's mind. He stayed nearby, though unspoken rules of distance remained in place. Over the next 48 hours, Adam noticed details he had never permitted himself to see before, details that spoke of a life endured without him. How she flinched at raised voices, even those of medical staff. How instinctively she shielded her stomach. Every movement, protective, measured, deliberate. How thin she had become. The hollowness of her arms and shoulders, the subtle, almost imperceptible tension in her posture. Guilt settled heavy and permanent in his chest, a weight unrelenting, one that no money, no power, no influence could alleviate. Adam found himself observing everything, unconsciously cataloguing minutiae, every reaction, every breath, every slight twitch of her body that spoke volumes about her months of endurance. He had ignored these things in the past, blinded by ambition, insulated by wealth and status, but now, forced into proximity with the consequences of his absence, every detail demanded his attention. He watched the way she shifted under the covers, the faint tremor of her hands, the unconscious movements protecting the life within her. Each observation deepened the guilt, each unspoken story adding another layer of remorse he could not escape. Hours became moments, moments became tests of patience and presence. Adam did not leave. He refrained from speaking unless necessary, yet his eyes betrayed the constant tension, the internal debate raging with every glance. Mary remained quiet, serene yet tense, her endurance absolute, never asking for more than was essential, never demanding attention. Yet her very existence challenged him, demanded acknowledgement of the years lost and the consequences ignored. His usual certainty faltered, replaced by a cautious awareness of vulnerability he had never allowed himself. When she finally spoke, after hours of watching and waiting, it was a quiet inquiry that pierced the heavy atmosphere. "Why do you care now?" she asked, voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of truth that demanded reckoning. Adam had no defense. Words failed him. His silence, long cultivated, long relied upon as armor, now answered in full, undeniable testament. His absence, his decisions, his priorities, all spoke louder than any apology he could muster. For the first time, Adam understood the potency of unspoken truths, the power of what silence could reveal about character and conscience. The tension between them was almost tangible, a thick, unyielding cord binding past mistakes and present responsibilities. Every minute passed slowly. Each one waited with anticipation, with dread, with the quiet hope of resolution. Adam could feel the gravity of what was about to unfold. The DNA test would confirm what was already clear, yet even confirmation would not erase the history, would not undo absence, would not lighten the burden of years lost. The waiting itself became a crucible, testing patience, endurance, and the limits of human guilt. Mary's presence remained a steady, almost stoic force in the room. She did not attempt to manipulate, to plead, or to sway Adam's actions. Instead, she embodied the consequences of his choices, the reality of survival, and the silent assertion of her autonomy. Her calmness contrasted sharply with his internal turbulence, amplifying the tension, magnifying the stakes. Every glance between them carried layers of history, pain, endurance, and the unspoken challenge of accountability. The next hours blurred into each other as Adam hovered near her bedside, observing, reflecting, and wrestling with the storm inside. He noticed the faint, protective pressing of her hand over her stomach, the rhythm of her shallow breaths, the small, deliberate movements designed to preserve energy, to shield life. Each observation punctuated his conscience, each silent act of resilience echoing the failures he had long ignored. He realized that presence alone was insufficient. He needed understanding, attentiveness, and an unwavering commitment to protect what he had neglected. On the third day, the culmination of this anxious vigil arrived in the form of a soft knock at the door. Adam's gaze shifted sharply as a nurse appeared, holding a small envelope, sealed and unmarked. The room seemed to constrict, the air thick with anticipation and the unspoken dread of truth. Adam's hands reached for the envelope, heart hammering, fingers brushing the edge with a trembling intensity he had not felt in years. Every second stretched, the weight of past choices pressing down, making the moment almost unbearable in its gravity. He tore the seal carefully, methodically, though each movement betrayed a nervous energy that was new to him. The paper inside was crisp, clinical, yet charged with potential, holding the confirmation that would either shatter or validate every fear, every guilt, every hope he had cultivated during this period of anxious waiting. Mary's gaze lingered on him, steady, unwavering, yet unintrusive, allowing the full weight of the moment to settle between them without interference. A silent acknowledgement of the past and the inevitability of consequences. Adam's pulse raced as he read the initial details, scanning the clinical text, noting the methodology, the precautions, the assurances of accuracy. Every sentence seemed to stretch time, prolonging the suspense, forcing him to confront the culmination of months of absence and years of avoidance. His hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, not from exhaustion, but from the emotional intensity of knowing that a single confirmation would irrevocably alter his understanding of responsibility, consequence, and accountability. The room remained quiet, except for the faint hum of machines and the rhythmic drip of the IV. Adam's mind cycled through endless scenarios: relief, confrontation, reconciliation, despair. Each possibility carried weight. Each one demanded reckoning. The silent communication between him and Mary was profound, subtle, unspoken, yet fully understood. She waited, patient, resilient, a living testament to endurance and survival, while he faced the truth he had long avoided. Now, unavoidable, Adam inhaled sharply, bracing himself, as he prepared to read the DNA results in full. The sealed report in his hands represented the final confirmation of months of uncertainty, a confrontation with reality that would demand accountability, action, and an irrevocable acknowledgement of the life he had neglected and the life he had helped create. Adam's fingers lingered over the sealed report, the sterile paper trembling slightly under the weight of reality. He had anticipated this moment for days, watched Mary with a careful, anxious vigilance, observed her every reaction, every flinch, every protective gesture, yet nothing could have prepared him for the physical, visceral impact of confirmation. The test was unequivocal. The child was his. The truth of paternity, once abstract and distant, now hit him with the force of inevitability, sending a wave of emotion crashing over him like an uncontrolled tide. He felt something inside him crack, a collapse of every emotional armor he had relied upon, a breakdown of defenses that money, power, and influence had never touched. For a long moment, he could not move, could not breathe. The realization was suffocating, pressing on his chest in a way that left him dizzy, disoriented, and achingly aware of the months, the years, the absence that had led to this point. His mind raced with fragments of memory, every instance of neglect, every choice that had prioritized empire over presence, every cold boardroom decision that had replaced the intimacy of human connection. He remembered the nights he had spent alone in luxury, the uncountable hours lost to meetings, to travel, to contracts, while the life that was his responsibility had grown, waited, and endured without him. Adam finally turned, his eyes meeting Mary's across the room. She sat upright, the faintest trace of exhaustion etched into her expression, yet her gaze remained steady, unwavering, unflinching. There was no relief in her eyes, no sudden lightening of burden, only the quiet, weary confirmation of truth, long endured. She did not look to him for validation or apology. She merely existed as proof of the consequence of his absence, a living testament to the price of neglect, and it struck him with devastating clarity. The room felt smaller, the sterile lights harsher, the silence more oppressive as the weight of recognition settled on him. He took a step closer, the air between them charged, thick with unsaid words, unacknowledged guilt, and the raw anticipation of confrontation. The moment demanded honesty, demanded the admission of truths he had long suppressed. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you," he confessed, voice low, deliberate, trembling with an emotion he could no longer contain. "I left because love demanded presence, and presence threatened the control I clung to." The words fell heavily into the space between them, each syllable echoing the complexity of his failure, the cost of absence, and the depth of his accountability. Mary listened without interruption, her posture firm, her expression unreadable, a controlled restraint that made his admission both insignificant and monumental at once. She did not soften, did not waver, did not offer forgiveness or relief. Instead, she spoke plainly, with the precise, cutting clarity of someone who had survived alone for far too long. She enumerated the cost of his absence with clinical precision, detailing the fear that had shadowed her nights, the isolation that had accompanied her daily existence, the immense challenge of survival without a partner, without support, without the man who had created the life she carried. Every word was a mirror to his neglect, a reflection of the impact of his choices, and Adam felt the sting of each accusation, each truth, each undeniable fact. Their argument escalated, raw and unscripted, a confrontation long overdue. Neither spoke in measured tones, neither attempted politeness or diplomacy. The room became a battlefield of emotion, the tension rising with each revelation, each painful acknowledgement, each wave of guilt that washed over him with renewed intensity. The sterile hum of machines, the beeping of monitors, even the distant murmur of hospital staff faded beneath the weight of their confrontation. Adam tried to defend himself, to explain the rationale of control he had once prized over presence, but his words faltered, inadequate against the relentless truth of her endurance. Every justification he offered felt hollow, meaningless, eclipsed by the reality she had lived. The months she had navigated alone. The life she had protected despite his absence. He realized with a piercing clarity that accountability was not abstract, that responsibility could not be delayed, postponed, or delegated. It demanded presence, action, and courage he had long avoided. The argument continued, voices raised in rare honesty, in an unfiltered torrent of emotion neither had permitted before. Mary's intensity surged, her anger tempered with fatigue, her words measured yet raw, each one a careful strike that revealed both strength and vulnerability. Adam absorbed each statement with a mix of guilt, shame, and recognition. The enormity of his failures laying bare before him in ways no corporate boardroom ever had. He was not merely witnessing the consequences of absence, he was living them, inhaling them, forced to confront the human cost of choices he had long rationalized away. Suddenly, without warning, Mary froze. Her hand gripped the edge of the table, knuckles whitening, body rigid in a spasm of pain that tore through her abdomen with unrelenting force. Adam's heart leapt, every instinct screaming as alarms erupted, shrill and urgent, filling the room with a cacophony of warning. Doctors and nurses rushed to her side, their movements efficient, precise, practiced, yet Adam felt frozen in place, paralyzed by fear, guilt, and the raw immediacy of the crisis unfolding before him. Mary's eyes, wide and fearful, flickered toward him, seeking reassurance, even as she grappled with agony that stole her breath and her control. Adam dropped to his knees beside her, hands hovering in helpless proximity, unsure whether to touch, to hold, or simply witness. Every second stretched, an eternity in microcosm, as the medical staff worked around them with urgency and precision. Machines beeped, monitors flashed, and Adam felt the terrifying proximity of mortality, the fragility of life, and the undeniable consequence of every month he had spent absent. He watched helplessly as she trembled, pain racking her small frame, every breath a labor of endurance, every movement a testament to the resilience he had long underestimated. The sterile room, once a symbol of distance, control, and safety, now transformed into a crucible of fear, responsibility, and urgency. Adam understood, with painful immediacy, that responsibility was not abstract. It was a living, breathing, suffering reality, demanding action, presence, and unwavering commitment. Mary's voice broke through the chaos, faint, strained, yet unmistakably present. "Adam, help me," she gasped, the words barely audible above the alarms, yet they carried the gravity of years of endurance, months of isolation, and the urgent imperative of now. Adam's body moved instinctively, hands finally reaching hers, grounding them both in a physical connection that neither money nor status could replicate. The enormity of the moment pressed down, a palpable weight demanding recognition. He could no longer hide, could no longer retreat, could no longer rationalize absence. The medical staff coordinated seamlessly, instructing Adam where to stand, what to do, how to respond without interfering with procedures. Each direction was followed with precision born of desperation, a silent acknowledgement that he was powerless alone, yet his presence was necessary, crucial, a tether to Mary's fragile state. Every instruction, every movement reinforced the truth that responsibility was not optional, it was immediate, unavoidable, and irrevocable. As the pain intensified, Mary's breaths grew shallower, more urgent, punctuated by gasps that echoed in Adam's chest, each one hammering the reality into him. Life was fragile, fleeting, dependent, and utterly beyond control. His past arrogance, his self-imposed distance, his years of absence, all were meaningless in the face of a moment that demanded complete attention, presence, and emotional surrender. He gripped her hand, offering what little comfort he could, each second stretching, each heartbeat a reminder of the responsibility he had avoided for far too long. The doctor's voice cut through the chaos, sharply, authoritative, commanding attention in a room filled with alarms and urgency. "She's going into labor." Adam's chest tightened, panic, fear, and an overwhelming sense of consequence crashing over him. Every second now mattered, every choice, every action, every breath critical. The reality of life, responsibility, and accountability pressed down like a living weight, demanding presence, demanding courage, demanding transformation. And in that moment, Adam understood fully that nothing, no wealth, no control, no past absence, could shield him from the responsibility he had run from for so long. The alarm blared sharply through the room, a sudden jarring note that shattered the tense silence, signaling the arrival of what Adam had been anticipating, yet dreading for days. Labor had begun in earnest. Mary's body trembled violently, every movement a mix of agony and fierce determination, a physical testament to months of endurance and survival. Adam remained at her side, kneeling on the cold hospital floor, heart hammering, breath uneven. His hands clasped over hers, feeling the tremor that ran from her fingers to her spine. The sterile lights cast stark shadows across the room, illuminating every subtle grimace, every contraction that stole her breath and held it hostage. Her screams rose and fell in waves, each one carrying more than pain. They carried years of suppressed anger, frustration, and abandonment. Adam's chest tightened as he realized the depth of what she had endured silently, the months she had navigated alone while he had been absent, distracted, absorbed in the empire he valued above all else. She shook violently, eyes squeezed shut, teeth clenched, and every cry seemed to tear through his carefully constructed self-control, leaving him raw, exposed, and utterly powerless to ease the suffering in front of him. Between contractions, her voice emerged, sharp, accusatory, slicing through the air with precision. "You left me. You abandoned me. And you expect what? To just show up now?" Her words pierced him, but he did not flinch. He did not attempt to justify himself. Every accusation, every truth-laden statement landed fully, unshielded by excuses or defenses. He held her hand tighter, not in defiance, not in protection of his ego, but as a silent acknowledgement of failure, presence, and accountability. The weight of every missed day, every absence, every choice to prioritize ambition over intimacy, now pressed on him with suffocating clarity. Adam watched her closely, noticing details that had escaped him for months, years even. The subtle clenching of her stomach to protect the child within, the arch of her back with each wave of pain, the trembling of her legs beneath the hospital gown, and the taut, strained rhythm of her breathing. Every movement was a testament to resilience, endurance, and a quiet, unyielding will. His eyes burned with guilt and awe as he realized how utterly he had underestimated the strength she carried, a strength forged in isolation, fear, and the harsh reality of being left alone to face the consequences of life itself. The contractions came faster, more intense, unrelenting, Adam adjusted his position, leaning closer, pressing gentle pressure on her hand, murmuring encouragements she could barely hear over the waves of anguish. He could feel the life within her moving, palpable in the rhythmic tensing and releasing of her body, and every pulse, every flutter, amplified the gravity of responsibility he had long avoided. His hands shook as he clutched hers, unable to do more than witness, support, and attempt to absorb some fragment of her suffering through shared presence alone. Mary's voice, between screams, grew sharper, sharper with clarity and undeniable truth. "You don't get to pretend this doesn't exist. You left me to fight alone. And now you think what? Your tears fix anything?" Adam swallowed hard, nodding slightly, unable to speak, knowing that no words could erase the years of absence, the months of isolation, the countless moments when he had prioritized everything else above her well-being. His silence was complete acceptance, a surrender to the full weight of consequence that now dominated the room. The room itself seemed to shrink. Every sound magnified: the rhythmic beeping of monitors, the shuffle of nurses' shoes on tile, the hiss of oxygen, the whispered commands of doctors coordinating each movement with clinical precision. Adam felt as if he had been transported into a crucible, each detail amplified by the emotional storm raging between them. Every flinch, every gasp, every tremor of Mary's body reminded him of the fragility of life, the consequences of absence, and the power of presence, demanded not by obligation, but by the undeniable reality of what he had created and abandoned. Minutes stretched into eternities, and Adam remained unwavering, though panic flitted behind his eyes with every new wave of contraction. He noticed the tremor in her shoulders, the shallow rise and fall of her chest, the tight clenching of her jaw, and the instinctive curling of her fingers around his own. Each gesture, each subtle movement, communicated volumes about her pain, her endurance, her resilience. He felt helpless, suffocated by guilt, yet compelled by a force stronger than fear: the desire to be present, to witness, to ensure that despite everything, he could no longer be absent when it truly mattered. Then came a moment of piercing stillness between contractions, a brief pause that carried the weight of all preceding months. Mary's eyes found his, wide and luminous despite exhaustion, and in that gaze, Adam saw not relief, not love, not forgiveness, but recognition. Recognition of his presence, at last, and recognition of the truth that nothing, no words, no gestures, no wealth or power, could erase the absence of years past. And yet, that recognition carried a fragile, flickering hope, a subtle invitation that perhaps, if he could sustain this presence, some measure of repair might be possible. Another contraction seized her body, violent, relentless, and Adam gritted his teeth, leaning in closer. He whispered words of encouragement, soft, low, almost drowned beneath the guttural cries of pain. He felt her hand squeeze his so tightly that his own bones seemed to ache, and he realized that every physical connection now mattered more than any declaration of love, more than any grand gesture. Presence alone, unwavering, became the truest testament of responsibility. Time blurred. The night of pain stretched and folded into the pale light of morning. Each cry echoed through Adam's chest, reverberating with years of guilt, months of absence, and the immediate intensity of labor. The medical staff moved seamlessly, calmly, yet their every motion heightened Adam's awareness of urgency. Each instruction, each adjustment, each calculated step reminded him of the stakes. This was not a rehearsal, not a theoretical crisis. This was life, immediate, fragile, and wholly dependent on the actions and presence of those in the room. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the room was filled with a different sound, a single, piercing, crystalline cry that cut through the haze of fatigue, the pain, the alarms, and the oppressive tension. Adam's breath caught. A baby girl, small, fragile, yet undeniably alive and breathing strong, had entered the world. The room seemed to exhale collectively, the alarms quieted, replaced by the rhythmic coos of a life newly begun. and Adam's knees buckled under the sudden gravity of emotion that no money, no control, no influence could ever replicate. The nurse, moving swiftly and gently, placed the tiny infant in Adam's arms. He could feel the minute warmth, the fragile heartbeat, the vulnerability of a life that had been entirely dependent on his presence in this singular, pivotal moment. His sobs broke forth unrestrained, raw, unfiltered, and unrelenting, as the magnitude of what he had almost lost flooded every fiber of his being. He was undone, exposed, and irreversibly human. Mary, still trembling, exhausted beyond measure, turned her face away from him, the exhaustion of months and the intensity of labor leaving her unmoved by his tears. Her strength, her endurance, her silent assertion of independence remained intact, a stark contrast to the torrent of vulnerability Adam now displayed. His emotion, while powerful, could not erase the history, could not erase the absence, could not undo the weight of years ignored. She spoke quietly, voice low but resonant, carrying both the authority of survival and the unyielding truth of consequence. "This doesn't erase what you did." Adam froze, the words landing with the weight of inevitability. Every tear, every sob, every instant of presence could not undo the past. He understood fully, painfully, that redemption would require more than this one moment, more than a single act of involvement, more than wealth, power, or status. It demanded consistency, accountability, and an unbroken commitment to presence. How would he sustain this presence? Could he truly become the partner and father he had long avoided being? Was the fragile trust, the tentative bond forming here, salvageable after years of absence and neglect? Adam's heart raced, mind racing through possibilities, but he knew one truth, with absolute clarity. The consequences of absence were unyielding, yet the opportunity for change, for accountability, had finally presented itself, stark and undeniable, on this Christmas morning of pain, responsibility, and irrevocable new life. The sterile hospital room had fallen quiet after the intensity of labor, leaving Adam with a fragile sense of clarity. The tiny cries of their daughter punctuated the silence, a reminder of life's delicate dependence, of consequences long ignored. He did not leave. For the first time in years, he stayed not out of obligation, not to appease guilt, but because presence had become a moral imperative. He had glimpsed, in the rawest moments of Mary's labor, the true cost of absence, the tangible consequences of neglect, and he understood that leaving now would be irredeemable. Adam made the decision then and there. He would step back from the empire he had spent a lifetime cultivating, the world of contracts, deals, and boardrooms that had consumed him completely. The recognition came swiftly and unflinchingly. Nothing, no matter how powerful, could replace presence. He informed his executive team that he would be on extended leave, a rare admission of vulnerability from a man who had long wielded control as armor. He delegated responsibilities with deliberate care, restructuring priorities to ensure the company would thrive even in his absence, yet his thoughts remained consumed by the small, fragile life resting in the bassinet beside him. The weight of accountability extended beyond corporate corridors. Adam confronted the senior staff who had enforced his emotional isolation for years, the assistants, managers, and advisors who had filtered his life to shield him from human vulnerability. They had obeyed his orders with precision, but he now recognized that their compliance had contributed to his absence, to the emotional distance he had cultivated so deliberately. One by one, he let them go, not out of cruelty, but to dismantle the structures that had permitted him to avoid responsibility. Each dismissal was a tangible acknowledgement of his complicity, a step toward confronting his failures honestly. At night, Adam learned the subtle rhythms of fatherhood. He approached each moment with clumsy determination, hands awkwardly handling the baby's tiny limbs, adjusting diapers, and rocking her to sleep with a reverent, almost desperate care. Every movement, every action was guided by an acute awareness of fragility. The life he had created demanded more than wealth or status. It required attentiveness, patience, and humility. Mary observed silently, allowing him access to their daughter while maintaining a careful emotional distance. She did not trust easily, and for good reason. Her heart bore the scars of years without him, a landscape of abandonment that could not be mended with mere presence alone. Even as he learned, stumbled, and persisted, Adam recognized that redemption was not earned in moments of heroism, but in the quiet constancy of effort. He bathed their daughter in the early hours, sang lullabies with trembling voice, and felt the weight of responsibility settle into his bones with every feed, every burp, every small, unsteady step toward proficiency. Mary did not offer guidance unless necessary. She maintained a measured observation, a guarded vigilance that tested him subtly, demanding proof not in grand gestures, but in everyday commitment. The home, previously a monument to luxury and isolation, slowly transformed under Adam's presence. Nights became rehearsals in endurance and attentiveness, mornings a meditation in humility. Every action was deliberate, every word measured. He learned to anticipate needs, to respond before being asked, to read subtle cues of distress or discomfort. His hands, once accustomed to wielding authority in boardrooms, now learned gentleness, precision, and patience in ways money had never taught. Despite his constant presence, Mary's heart remained a fortress. Adam understood fully that access to their daughter did not grant access to forgiveness or intimacy. Every request for reconciliation, every plea for emotional closeness was met with measured caution. Her trust had been fractured by years of absence, by choices he had made without her, by a history of prioritizing empire over family. Adam knelt before her one evening in the soft lamplight of the nursery, small and humbled, offering nothing but honesty and an unspoken promise. Not a ring, not a grand speech, only the opportunity to demonstrate change through consistent presence. Mary's gaze held his, steady and unwavering, a mirror of years of endurance and quiet resilience. She listened, but she did not soften. Her voice, when it came, was quiet yet resolute, carrying the weight of all the nights she had endured alone, all the burdens she had borne without support. "I will not survive loving the man you used to be," she said, each word deliberate, cutting through the space between them with precision. Adam absorbed the truth without argument, without denial, recognizing fully that rebuilding trust would be a marathon, not a single gesture or admission. Every night that followed tested Adam's commitment. He attended every feeding, every midnight cry, every subtle need with unwavering focus. He adapted to the routines he once deemed mundane, understanding at last that responsibility was a continuous, relentless act of presence, not occasional heroics. Every challenge, sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, subtle cues of distress, was a reminder that accountability had weight and that redemption required patience, consistency, and humility. Mary's guarded observation never ceased. She allowed him into her child's world, yet remained cautious in her interactions with him. Adam recognized the lesson implicit in her restraint. Trust is not granted by desire or proclamation. It is earned through relentless proof, through patience, and through presence. Every day presented small victories, a smile returned, a soft laugh shared, a moment of shared recognition. Yet these were tempered by the reality of her vigilance, a constant reminder that presence alone was insufficient. Consistency, integrity, and unwavering commitment were essential. Adam's reflection deepened during quiet moments alone, when the baby slept and the house was hushed. He replayed past decisions, acknowledging fully the depth of failure, the consequences of absence, and the challenges that lay ahead. He did not allow himself excuses or rationalizations. Instead, he embraced discomfort, The awareness that redemption is neither instant nor guaranteed, that the weight of responsibility must be carried daily, without interruption, without avoidance, and without expectation of immediate forgiveness. And each evening, as he watched Mary rock their daughter to sleep, eyes guarded yet observant, he knew the journey ahead was not defined by wealth or power, but by the relentless, unyielding proof of presence. Mary's words haunted him, echoing through the quiet night. "I will not survive loving the man you used to be." And in that echo, Adam realized that no shortcut, no gesture, no instant redemption could erase the past. Only unwavering, consistent, authentic change could carve a future, one moment at a time. The house Adam moved into was modest, a stark contrast to the towering opulence of the estate he had once called home. It was quiet, practical and functional, deliberately chosen to offer proximity without intrusion, presence without pressure. No announcements were made, no fanfare, no grand gestures to impress. He simply arrived, day after day, bringing with him a consistency he had never afforded before. Every morning he would prepare for the day as he had for a boardroom, yet the objective had changed. Attendance, patience, presence. Every detail of his previous life had been stripped away, leaving him with nothing but the raw, unadorned task of proving himself worthy. Adam established a rhythm. He would arrive before dawn, ensuring the baby's needs were met, feeding, clothing, gentle soothing when tears or cries pierced the quiet of the morning. He learned to anticipate her movements, to respond without hesitation, to notice subtle cues Mary had always relied upon him to see. Each day became a silent demonstration of devotion, of unwavering commitment. He did not seek acknowledgement or gratitude. He did not attempt grand gestures to sway her feelings. Instead, he let action speak where words had long failed, understanding at last that redemption could not be purchased or proclaimed. It had to be earned, quietly and persistently. Mary, as always, observed with a careful, guarded vigilance. She allowed him into the routines of their daughter's life, yet every interaction, every moment was measured, deliberate. Trust had been shattered, fractured, and though the years of absence had faded in memory, the scars remained. Adam could feel them in the subtle hesitations, the brief tensing of her hands, the careful modulation of her voice. Every step he took forward was met with a small test, a challenge she presented silently to measure whether he had truly changed, whether he could sustain presence, whether he could embody the consistency that trust demanded. Weeks passed, months unfolded, and Adam's presence never wavered. He attended every doctor visit, every minor illness, every moment of crisis or concern, unflinching. Each shared silence became an unspoken dialogue, a bridge between their fractured past and the tentative beginnings of a shared future. Every small smile from Mary or the daughter became a reward not of gratitude, but of recognition, a fragile acknowledgement that his consistency was being noted, absorbed, and slowly, cautiously accepted. 1 year passed. One full cycle of seasons, of holidays, of daily routines, meticulously observed, faithfully executed. Adam had shed the last vestiges of his former arrogance, his detachment, his belief that control could substitute for presence. He had come to understand, viscerally, that trust is not granted by past wealth, by eloquent apologies, by moments of generosity, but by sustained, demonstrable commitment over time. He had learned patience in its most grueling, most unforgiving form, the slow work of rebuilding a life that had been fractured by absence. As Christmas approached again, the air crisp and sharp with the first snow, Adam prepared for the season quietly. The lights he strung were simple, understated, a reflection of the new rhythm he had embraced. Warmth without extravagance, presence without performance. The house smelled faintly of pine and subtle spices, a quiet homage to the holiday without the overwhelming grandeur of past celebrations. He spent the days ensuring the routines were seamless, the environment safe and welcoming for his daughter, the atmosphere calm and consistent, embodying the principles he had adopted over the preceding year. On Christmas Eve, snow fell heavily, soft and insistent, blanketing the world outside in quiet white. Adam had completed the evening's preparations, settling into a measured calm that had replaced the panic and helplessness of the previous year. The doorbell rang. His heart stuttered, not from surprise, for he had anticipated this moment, but from the weight of anticipation and uncertainty. Standing outside, framed by the falling snow, was Mary, their daughter cradled in her arms. Her coat was wrapped tightly, her expression steady, unwavering, eyes sharp and alert. The world seemed to pause around them, the snowflakes suspended in time, each one reflecting the fragile hope and tension of the moment. Adam opened the door slowly, stepping back to give her space, fully aware that this was no ordinary reunion. The warmth of the lights inside contrasted sharply with the cold, snow-laden world outside, a visual metaphor for the delicate boundary between the past and the present, between distrust and the possibility of reconciliation. He could see the subtle tension in Mary's posture, the protective tilt of her body over their child, the faint tightness in her hands as she held the infant close. Every detail, every gesture spoke volumes about her caution, her vigilance, and the measured consideration with which she approached him. Mary's eyes locked on his, unwavering, searching, piercing through the familiar facade of control and power he had once wielded effortlessly. There was no softening, no immediate forgiveness, no spontaneous warmth. Instead, there was scrutiny, assessment, and a careful calibration of trust. Adam recognized the unspoken challenge. This was the culmination of a year's worth of effort, the threshold at which years of absence, neglect, and distance might finally begin to reconcile with the consistency, patience, and presence he had finally offered. He did not speak immediately. Words were secondary now. They had always failed before. Instead, he allowed the quiet presence to communicate what words could not: steadfastness, commitment, reliability, and the unbroken attention he had maintained throughout the year. Every movement was deliberate, a step back to offer space, a soft gesture toward the child, a gentle, open-handed invitation for Mary to approach if she chose. He waited, measured, patient, understanding that the power of proof lay not in declaration, but in unspoken action, in the quiet constancy that had defined the past 12 months. Mary shifted slightly, the child nestled securely, eyes still locked on Adam's. The snow continued to fall, a silent witness to the tension and anticipation, a delicate backdrop to a reunion that demanded cautious navigation. Adam sensed the weight of every second, every heartbeat, every subtle expression. The air between them was dense with unspoken history, with the cumulative consequence of absence, with the fragile possibility of reconciliation predicated on evidence of unwavering presence. The daughter stirred in Mary's arms, a tiny, urgent reminder of the reason for all of this. Life dependent on accountability, love requiring proof through sustained action. Adam's gaze softened, yet remained steady, his presence deliberate, patient, unwavering. The warmth of the house behind him contrasted with the cold, unforgiving snow outside, symbolizing the boundary between past neglect and the possibility of a new chapter defined by consistency, accountability, and authentic effort. Mary's voice, measured, deliberate, cut through the silence. "If I walk in," she said, her tone steady, unwavering, "there's no disappearing again." The words hung in the air, a final test, a boundary, a challenge, and a promise all at once. Adam inhaled deeply, recognizing the magnitude of the moment, not just the culmination of a year's consistent effort, but the invitation to sustain presence, to honor trust, to demonstrate, day after day, that absence was no longer an option, that redemption was a living, ongoing commitment. Would she step across the threshold? Could Adam maintain the constancy required? Would the fragile trust of a year of silent proof hold or shatter under the weight of past failures? Each second seemed suspended in time, snowflakes falling in slow, deliberate descent, reflecting the fragile hope that presence, consistency, and unwavering dedication could finally begin to heal wounds carved deep by years of absence. Adam extended a gentle hand, a gesture not of demand, not of coercion, but of invitation and acknowledgement of her autonomy. He understood fully that proof was not instant, that promises meant little without sustained action, and that the threshold they were both approaching was not merely a physical crossing of the doorway, but the fragile, tentative movement toward trust, rebuilt over months of quiet, relentless, unwavering presence. The daughter shifted again in Mary's arms, a subtle signal of life, continuity, and dependence. Adam's eyes followed, tracing every movement, absorbing every detail with the meticulous care of a man transformed by responsibility, humbled by consequence, and committed to sustaining the presence he had once denied. The snow continued to fall softly outside, each flake a silent witness to the fragile, tentative hope that proof, patience, and consistency could forge a new chapter from the ashes of absence. The door closed gently behind Mary as she stepped inside, her daughter cradled against her chest, warmth radiating despite the chill of the snow that clung to her coat. Adam stood still for a moment, letting the quiet of the house absorb the tension that had hung between them for so long, the weight of anticipation that had accumulated over months and years of absence. He did not rush forward, did not speak. Instead, he simply waited, presence as his offering, patience as his pledge. Mary's eyes met his, unwavering, measuring, cautious, yet tempered by the subtle recognition of the countless days he had shown up, the countless nights he had stayed, the unbroken string of proof that no words could replace. She had watched him evolve quietly, without proclamation, without demands, simply through action and steadfast consistency. The child in her arms stirred slightly, small fingers curling, eyes blinking against the soft light, a fragile yet undeniable symbol of the life they had both created and survived to protect. Adam stepped closer, slowly, careful not to break the fragile balance. Each movement was deliberate, weighted with the understanding that trust had been earned through patience, not coercion, not rhetoric. He reached gently toward the child, allowing Mary to guide the interaction, ensuring that every motion, every gesture was consensual and deliberate. Their daughter's tiny fingers reached toward his hand, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Adam felt the full, unfiltered joy of connection, a bond formed not by control but by presence, care, and shared responsibility. Mary finally relaxed slightly, letting her shoulders drop, exhaling a breath she had held for years. Adam could feel the subtle shift, the thawing of a frost that had settled deep in her heart, a frost formed from the cold absence of his love and protection. He understood fully that this did not erase the past, did not erase the years of pain, neglect, or fear, but it marked the beginning of a new chapter, one defined not by history, but by the deliberate, consistent choice to remain, to participate, and to sustain. Adam knelt slowly before them, drawing the child closer, his eyes never leaving Mary's. There were no words of apology too grand, no proclamations of undying love that might ring hollow after years of absence. Instead, there was presence, raw, unguarded, accountable presence. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for both of them, embracing not only the child but the fragile, carefully measured trust that Mary had extended after months of observation and subtle testing. The daughter giggled softly, a small, uncontainable sound that echoed through the room like a bell of fragile, fleeting joy. Adam's chest tightened at the sound, an almost physical reminder of what had been at stake, of the love he had neglected, of the life that depended entirely on his willingness to change. He felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, but this time They were not born of helplessness, but of humility, of recognition, of gratitude for the chance to finally, fully participate in a family he had once abandoned. Mary rested her head against his chest, a gesture not of forgiveness fully granted, but of acknowledgement that the past no longer had the power to dominate her fears. Her presence was steady, deliberate, the subtle rhythm of her breath against his chest, a testament to both endurance and tentative hope. Adam felt the weight of responsibility settle deeply into his bones, a grounding force he had long avoided. Here, in the quiet warmth of the house, surrounded by snow falling softly against the windows, he understood the profound truth that presence, accountability, and consistency could heal fractures that words alone could never reach. Outside, the snow continued to fall, heavy yet soft, covering the world in quiet white. It no longer bit with cold or threatened to freeze the spirit. It was harmless now, a backdrop to the fragile warmth inside. Adam watched Mary and their daughter, observing the subtle interactions, the tiny smiles, the gentle touches. Each moment carried weight. Each gesture carried significance. He realized that real success was not measured in wealth, in influence, in power, but in the steady, unbroken commitment to those who relied on him, in the sustained presence that transformed absence into trust, neglect into care. For hours, they remained together in the room, sharing silence punctuated by laughter, soft coos, and gentle reassurances. Adam held them both, rocking lightly, feeling the heartbeat of life in his arms. There were no grand declarations, no promises beyond the simplest truths. He would stay, he would care, he would remain accountable. Each breath was a pledge, each gentle movement a demonstration that change was not temporary, not performative, but deliberate, ongoing, and absolute. Memories of past failures arose briefly, sharp reminders of the years lost, the moments absent, the pain endured, but they no longer controlled the present. Adam acknowledged them fully, letting them exist without allowing them to dominate. Mary's presence, her steady watchfulness, and the fragile trust she had extended provided both a framework and a challenge. Redemption would not be instant, love would not be effortless, but the path forward existed, defined by intentional action, unwavering commitment, and presence sustained through time. The daughter's laughter filled the room again, a delicate melody that seemed to harmonize with the soft rustling of the snow outside. Adam felt the weight of every failure he had carried for years, now counterbalanced by the quiet, persistent evidence of proof, actions, patience, presence, and the slow building of trust. Each interaction, each small gesture, was a tangible step toward a family reunited not by circumstance, but by deliberate, authentic effort. Mary's hands found his, small and firm, a subtle acknowledgement of connection, of tentative trust, of the recognition that he had finally embraced the responsibility that once eluded him. He did not speak. Words were unnecessary. His actions, his presence, his unwavering attention had communicated more than any apology could. She allowed herself the smallest sigh of relief, the quietest hint of ease, signaling that the frost of fear and guardedness had finally begun to thaw under the persistent warmth of consistent care. Adam's chest rose and fell slowly, deliberately, as he held them both. He understood fully that perfection was impossible, that forgiveness was a process, and that trust was built one day at a time. There were no shortcuts, no instant resolutions, only presence, accountability, and the unwavering choice to remain. He embraced the reality of imperfection, the challenge of sustained commitment, and the power of deliberate, persistent care. Snow continued to fall outside, each flake a gentle reminder that some winters are long, unrelenting, and harsh. But they do end, eventually. The warmth within the house contrasted sharply with the cold outside, a reflection of the transformation that had occurred over months of effort and presence. Adam realized, with profound clarity, that real success is not built in moments of control, not earned through wealth or influence, but sustained through daily, deliberate, consistent action, the steady proof that one can change, that one can remain, and that one can love responsibly. Mary's eyes met his once more, steady, calm, and finally, just a little softened. Adam held them both closer, inhaling the subtle scent of trust, warmth, and new beginnings. Their daughter laughed again, a bright, clear sound that seemed to illuminate the room, the moment, and the passage of time itself. Adam allowed himself a quiet smile, not from relief but from recognition. Presence, consistency, and accountability had transformed absence into connection, fear into trust, and fractured lives into a fragile, hopeful family. For the first time, Adam allowed himself to envision a future free from the shadows of past mistakes. He understood, viscerally, that some winters are long, that some trials are harsh, and that some absences carry consequences that cannot be erased. Yet here, in this room, with snow falling gently outside and the fragile warmth of family within, he realized the ultimate truth. He could stay, he could care, he could sustain love through presence and accountability. Mary rested her head more fully against his chest, allowing herself a moment of peace, not because the past was erased, but because it no longer ruled her fear. The child nestled between them laughed softly again, the sound delicate, innocent, and undeniably life-affirming. Adam felt the weight of responsibility settle fully into place, a grounding force that had once terrified him, but now offered purpose, clarity, and hope. He whispered softly, almost to himself, as much as to them, "I will stay. I will not leave. I will care. Always." No grand declarations, no promises. Beyond the tangible truth of action, just presence, accountability, and unwavering commitment. Mary's hands tightened slightly on his chest, a subtle sign that the trust had been extended, and Adam understood fully that the journey ahead, though still fraught with challenges, was now navigable through patience, consistency, and deliberate choice. Outside, the snow fell in gentle sheets, silent, harmless, a quiet testament to endurance, the passage of time, and the fragile beauty of reconciliation. Adam understood at last that real success, real love, and real family are not built in moments of perfection, but sustained through consistent, deliberate, unwavering presence. Some winters take longer than others to end, some challenges are steeper than expected, and some scars remain visible long after the storm has passed. But finally, this winter had ended. Adam held them both tightly, feeling the heartbeat of family, presence, and accountability flowing through the room. Mary lifted her head slightly, allowing her eyes to meet his once more. There was understanding in her gaze, quiet acknowledgement that the past no longer held dominion over the present, that the deliberate, persistent choice to stay had forged a bridge between absence and connection, fear and trust, abandonment and family. The daughter's laughter continued, light and crystalline, harmonizing with the soft fall of snow outside. Adam realized fully, with every fiber of his being, that love, presence, and accountability, sustained without interruption, without shortcuts, and without evasion, were the true measures of life, family, and redemption. Here, in the warmth of the house, amidst laughter, trust, and fragile peace, the cold, long winter had finally ended, leaving behind the promise of a future built not on absence, but on deliberate, unwavering presence. And that's the end of today's story. I hope it touched your heart as much as it touched ours while sharing it. Remember, some stories stay with us long after they end, reminding us of love, hope, and the power of second chances. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Beyond Color Stories. There are many more heartfelt journeys waiting for you. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.